The first thing I wanted to talk about was first impressions. Like, you all know, it's like the first 7 seconds, right? You make an impression on people as they figure out who you are, your name, what they make a judgment call based on that. And so not only does that happen with people and our names, but it actually happens with our churches and our church names and what we put forth. So I was thinking this church up here was really doing a great job at figuring out how to put their best foot forward and make a good impression on people. But when I found this one, what was even funnier to me is that not only did they figure out how to do this, but then a church decided to copy the sermon series, and a different church adopted their strategy as well, just to make that really good first impression. So as we start thinking about, in our own context, some of the things that really needed to change as we began to figure out how God was going to position our church for the future and for future growth, was really looking at our name. Our name was something that, we know in Scripture God would take people like Abram and Sarai and really give them a new name with a new purpose. And so this is actually a biblical concept to figure out when a name change needs to happen. And so as we were looking at that, we started looking at what our original name was, which was First Baptist Church of Pomona, and how it was throwing up some roadblocks in our context of reaching other people. And so our kind of history of our name, we began almost 150 years ago. We're going to be, in the year 2020, we are going to celebrate our 150th anniversary. And so we are an ancient dinosaur. We have been around a long time. And we have had the privilege of seeing God rise up a fresh generation of leaders for over 150 years that have continued to minister in this context, grow the church, and move it forward. And so our history is that we kind of went from First Baptist Church of Pomona, then we started to shorten it. We went to Pomona First Baptist, then we got really hip and we went to PFB. We just went by the acronym. So we knew what we were doing there. Then we began to feel the Spirit move that it was time to actually make a big change and change our name. But we were a little gun shy to go cold turkey with the whole thing. So we brought in this really awesome slash. And so we were PFB/Purpose Church for a while, and I think we just kind of hoped the PFB would eventually fall off, and eventually we had to, just pull the plug and make a clean cut, and we went to being Purpose Church. And so that is one of the things that has been very instrumental for us, is actually having a name change. That's one of the things that we felt really gave us some momentum, and it has been surprising to us actually to even see how much that God has used our name change to bring change within our own context in our community. It has given us all kind of a fresh eyes to look at our ministries, and almost given us permission to reinvent some of the things that we had always done. Because we had a new name, a new brand, a new look, it gave us permission to start wrestling with some of the things that we've always done. But if we'd always had that name and we could change that, then what else could we change, and how could God use that? And so the way that we became Purpose Church was we worked with an outside company, and we asked them to help us find a name that the URL was available, because of course that's super important, but also that was really helpful for people as they could navigate faith questions in their life. And so one of the ones, as they learned about our church, was giving us that name, Purpose. And we at first thought, gosh, it's kind of vanilla. Do we really want to just be Purpose Church? It's not as hip and cool as so many other names that are out there. But the more we wrestled with it, the more we thought, this is a really cool name for us, because it helps us with what our mission is, to give people purpose in Jesus. And so we've had a lot of fun being able to hear people's stories, especially millennials and people maybe even in college context now, that are searching for purpose in their life, and they're wrestling with questions of faith and God, and they start Googling church, faith, purpose, and our name pops up. And we've had people come to our church purely because of the name that they've found online. So that's been a really exciting thing, and way that we've seen God use a name change, something that we had no idea that would be so transformational in our kind of trajectory for the future has been such a tremendous blessing for us. The next thing I wanted to mention was something that you guys are all very familiar with, thanks to Tom Mercer, is oikos. But this really is what we always joke about all the time, our favorite Greek word. And it has been a really important strategy for us to not only adopt this, but also to continue to use it in our context, to continue to bring it before our people and talk about what oikos is. So if you're unfamiliar with it, oikos is the 8 to 15 people around you in your sphere of influence that are supernaturally and strategically placed by God for you to begin a friendship with, to begin a relationship with, and to share Christ with. And so we talk about oikos in our own context with our people, and we talk about it with our staff, and whenever we prepare an event or have an outreach opportunity, we really talk about this is an oikos opportunity for you guys to be able to bring one of those people that you are in relationship with, that only you can be in relationship with. And let me tell you, I love oikos because it really takes the pressure off evangelism at some levels for our people, because it's not like you have to go out and save the entire world. Rather, it is the people that you are really in relationship with. And for me, that has been so wonderful to get to be able to talk with my kids, and as my kids are in public school, so we have a lot of opportunities to interact with non-Christians and build relationships with families. And the verse that's probably the most important verse to me right now, I keep this on my desk, this is something that God has just really put on my heart, is that we should not make it difficult for the Gentiles who are turning to God. And it just breaks my heart when churches are doing things that make it difficult for people to come into an understanding of who Jesus is and how Jesus makes your life better and how you can be better at life because of Jesus. And so oikos, I think, is a really simple strategy, and it's one of the things that's been helpful to us to propel our church forward and continue to allow us to multiply and grow and empower our people to do evangelism in a very simple, easy, natural context that won't overwhelm them and doesn't make them need to feel like they have to know every answer. They just need to be able to share their life and to share their story. The next thing I wanted to share was the idea of putting lipstick on a pig. We are a very old campus, and so, depending on who comes in here, we had a very big name person come in and perform, and I was very excited she was here. She packed the house. We had a full house, and I invited her to come back a year later and see if she would come back, and she was like, "Oh, I remember your church. It looks like a crack house." I'm like, "Oh, awesome. That's how you remember our church. We're the Crack House Church. Just how we want to be known. Thanks." So we have a lot of falling down buildings, a lot of boarded up places. I don't know if any of you can relate to in your context. And so that has been a challenge for us. And so
that was one of the names we did consider.
That was one of the challenges we did. Crack House Church. Crack House, Purpose. So good. So we have really been intentional about trying to do some work on campus, and it's tough. There's just not a lot of money. We don't have money to fix up buildings and stuff, but when we do a campaign, that is one of the things that we are trying to consistently think through about how our campus appears and how we can take some of our old buildings and make them look as best we can with just a little bit of money. So, even just some fresh coats of paint and those kinds of things really make a difference to our community and as people are coming in and looking at appearances. So it seems so shallow and surface to have to talk about something like that, but especially for people who didn't grow up in a church and they're coming in here and wondering, can we trust you with our kids? Is this a safe place? To be able to have an environment that looks well has been a significant change for us, and striving to continue to make some of those improvements. Okay, I love to take groups of people over to the Holy Land. It's one of the things my husband and I are passionate about. My husband is a New Testament scholar at Hope International University, and so every 4 or 5 years we take groups over to Israel. And so one of the things, if you've ever done international travel, is it's awesome to get there, but the process of getting there is like a 19 to 21 to 26 hour plane ride. And so the process of being contained in that airplane can be so frustrating, so overwhelming, and you have to figure out ways to like make sure that your head stays in the game so that you can focus and not go crazy being in that tiny little airplane in your tiny little seat, being so confined. And so as Glenn was asking us to really think through some of the things that have been instrumental in Purpose Church and how God has worked here, one of the things that came to my mind was that we have had a history, and Glenn is so good at modeling this for us, is leaning into leadership for the long haul. And that is really the idea of not thinking that you're in a place just for a tiny amount of time before you can look for the next big opportunity and get out of there. But to really keep your head in the game and to really invest with all that you are in that place. And we have seen God do some really amazing things in our particular context because we've had leaders that have stayed for a long time. They've invested in where God has called them to be. And I wanted to walk through some of the benefits and some of the blessings that I've seen God pour out because of that faithfulness. Now, one of the funny things in our church is there's our fearless leader there staring up into the heavens. But if you can see our worship center, those lights up there, when our worship center was built in the 80s, the genius architect did not have a good plan of how to change our lights. And so the old light bulbs that were put in the 1980s, anytime a light bulb went out, to change that light bulb, you had to put scaffolding. You'd have to scaffold up, and we'd have to have like a whole team to change one light bulb. I mean, there's so many Baptist church jokes about how many people it takes to change a light bulb in our worship center because it really did. It was such a pain. So when we were able to change all of those lights out to LED, it was a significant lighting change for us. It has totally made a difference. So, LEDs have a rated life of up to 50,000 hours. It's about 50 times longer than a typical incandescent. They're used 12 hours a day. An LED bulb will last more than 11 years. So an LED light bulb is there to go the distance. It is there to stay for a long time. It is such a difference from then changing these light bulbs out on a constant basis. Gene Scarborough, our facilities guys in the back nodding, yes. And so one of the things about investing in the place that you are at with a mindset that you are going to be there for a while and see how God can use you and grow you in that context is that it helps to bring stability to that particular ministry area. It brings stability to your people. It brings stability to your congregation. And I think today, more than ever, that in our culture that is just pulling rugs out from underneath people right and left, that when they can lean into a church community, a church family, and look to leadership that is humble and is competent and leading with excellence, but that they can depend on. They know that they are there, that gives people a certain comfort level to continue to mature in their faith and grow in their walk with the Lord. So stability of leadership is something that was really God's idea originally. In Matthew 16:8, he said, "And on this rock," Jesus said, "I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not overcome it." Jesus chose the idea of a rock, something that is solid, something that is stable, something that does not shift and give way easily. And so the whole idea of stability is something that I believe that Jesus really wants for the church and wants for church leaders. This idea also brings the idea of the gift of time. When you have the gift of time, it gives you the ability to vision and adopt in things into your budget, into your planning, into kind of your long-range vision of where you want to go. A watched pot never boils, right? And so when you want to jump into a context and immediately do things, there can be some really awesome things that happen. But when you're invested there, you can see God over and over and and over again show up in amazing, positive ways that you had never hoped, dreamed, or imagined. And so investing in the context that you've been placed gives you the gift of time. It also really brings the gift of spiritual maturity. And this is something that I have been so honored to kind of walk beside Glenn as our leader and see that there is just something that happens with believers as they lead for a long time well. When they lead out of a very strong place of integrity, that there is this beautiful, like you see fruit being happening around their lives. You see a sense of how God honors someone who is faithful in their marriage and faithful in spending time with their kids and their grandkids and making wise decisions with money. That when there is this faithfulness there's this spiritual maturity, you see that God wants to bless that and honor that. And that is something that, as I continue to grow as a leader, I want to have. And God honors that when we are invested in that way. And then the last thing is the idea of bearing fruit, because bearing fruit is something that we all want to have happen in our ministries. And when we're invested and we stay the course, that we're not living for the dot, but we're living for the line, that is something that God uses to start to see this fruit bear. And you guys know that, when we hang in there with our neighbors that aren't Christians and we keep inviting them and we keep talking to them about Jesus and we keep showing up for them in their hard times. It isn't that one conversation that brings that change in their life. It is that repetitive behavior of them seeing God's faithfulness in your life that brings that change. And so those are just a few of the qualities that I have been really overwhelmed with in the last few years that I've been here, to be able to see how God honors that idea of really sticking to where you're planted and allowing God to utilize you in the midst of that. Okay, so Greg and I are going to share kind of talking about this idea of getting people on the bus and off the bus and what that looks like. So I'm going to talk about getting people off the bus, and so you guys know this metaphor, right, with Jim Collins' Good to Great book. He talked a lot about the importance of staff decisions and how you get the right people on the bus and how you get the wrong people off the bus. Part of leadership in the church, and you guys know this as well, it can be so challenging because it's not run like a business or a corporation. So many churches feel like a family, and because of that, it makes transitions really, really difficult. But they are something that are important if we want to continue to fulfill the mission that God has called you to, and to do that with excellence. And one of the things that we always wrestle with is sometimes when we have a team member that is underperforming, we want to do all that we can to be clear, to give clear expectations, to set those goals, to try and communicate clearly what the expectation is. And then when that expectation is not met, that we do need to make a transition there, because it really demotivates the rest of the team that are killing it, that are doing a good job, that are excelling, if they do not see that team members who are underperforming are not handled well in terms of the senior leadership. That if we can't make those tough calls, that's part of what our job is when you're working in terms of kind of the senior leadership environment. And it's not a very fun part of the job, but it is a necessary part of the job to keep the organization healthy. And so we have found that not only making the calls to get the right people on the bus, but getting the wrong people off the bus are equally as important, and to have a strategy and a system to do that kindly, graciously, but effectively for the health of the church as well. Because not only are we responsible for doing that with an individual, but we're responsible to all the families that God has called us to shepherd. And so that means that we owe all of those families excellence with how we steward the money that they give us, and for the responsibilities that they have given us to lead them spiritually in those areas.